All right, shall we begin? So we ended with this slide last time, talking about the pelvic outlet and all of the different apertures that are important for childbirth. So then we want to step forward and what happened? I don't know what happened. There we go. Switch from the pelvic floor to talk a little bit more about the pelvic wall. So again, we're going to have some familiar names in this section. So the pelvic wall would be this area here. And so components are going to be the obturator membrane, the sacrospinous ligament, and the sacrotuberous ligament for the first step, and then we have the wall here of the ischium, this portion of the ischium making up the pelvic wall. Excuse me. We add another layer on. Remember, we have the obturator internus muscle and the piriformis muscle here. This is piriformis. So that's major components of the pelvic wall. This diagram, I'd like you to just be beginning to get familiar with all of the different structures that pass through the apertures. So we've got the obturator canal here, where we have the obturator nerve and vessels moving through. We have the greater sciatic foramen. We have both above and below the piriformis muscle. So we've got gluteal nerves and vessels going superior to the piriformis muscle, and then a whole slew of things going inferior to it, the piriformis muscle, including gluteal nerves and vessels, femoral nerves and vessels, and then the sciatic nerve. And then finally we have the lesser sciatic foramen, and we have the pudendal nerve and vessels as some of the major components of structures moving from the pelvis outside of the pelvic cavity through that aperture. So be familiar with those. Excuse me. And then we've talked about the pelvic bone, the pelvic wall. Now let's move down to the pelvic floor and get into the details of that. So the pelvic floor basically is going to be filling in the pelvic outlet. So it's going to be attached to the pubic arches on either side, as well as coming down through what's the word I'm looking for? Edges of the pelvic outlet. Okay, and I know you guys have been going over these in lab already, so we can just go through them fairly quickly. So we've got our piriformis muscle here. Remember, here's our piriformis. Then here we step down and have the coccygeus muscle. So that's the same as on this side here, coccygeus muscle. And then we have the three muscles that make up the levator ani. So the iliococcygeus, pubococcygeus, and puborectalis muscles.
Do we need to know those?
Yes, you do need to know all those three. Okay. I just want to also point out quickly, we already talked about this briefly in the first lecture we had on this, but the anal aperture and then the urogenital hiatus. Okay. This anal aperture in the pelvic floor is where the rectum actually turns into the anal canal, so that's that border between the two. Yes?
So the coccygeus muscle,
Mhm.
it's that one that goes transversely, it's not the one that it's pointing to?
No, this is pointing to the other side. So these are the two on each side.
Oh, they're the same, it's the
Yeah.
same, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
These are apertures where it turns into the rectum?
No, from where the rectum turns into the anal canal.
Anal canal.
That's that transition point there. Mhm. Okay.
Which view is
Sorry?
this? What view would you say this is?
So this is kind of looking superiorly, kind of to the side. So the other iliac crest would be kind of right about here-ish. Oops. So kind of looking over that corner there. Okay. So then we go down a level. So that was the pelvic diaphragm. So this we call the pelvic diaphragm. And then we go down a level and we hit the perineal membrane. So this is the next component of the pelvic floor. And the perineal membrane is attached to the pelvic diaphragm at the edges of the urogenital hiatus. So right here you can see the shape of the urogenital hiatus. That's the physical connection between the pelvic diaphragm and the perineal membrane.
Can you show where the pelvic diaphragm is in the front, please?
So the pelvic diaphragm is this whole thing. So all of the muscle layers that make that kind of cup shape
Oh.
structure, okay? And then attached at the level of the urogenital hiatus, so right here, and kind of sliding in underneath it is the perineal membrane. And then between the that pelvic diaphragm and the perineal membrane is what we call the deep perineal space. So we have this perineal membrane, and I have to switch slideshows now. So are you guys done with this figure? Okay. Okay, so here's another picture of the perineal membrane, kind of a stylized picture from the side. So then the pelvic diaphragm would be, see if I can draw it without obliterating things too much, kind of here-ish. Connected here, kind of making this cup shape over the top of this perineal membrane. So then the perineal membrane is attached here and here, and then other structures of the perineal membrane attach here at the urogenital hiatus. Got everybody pretty clear on that?
Can you say
Okay.
that one more time?
At the urogenital hiatus?
So the perineal membrane here attaches there. All the way around here is a layer of fascia that separates the two. It attaches there, and then here. Okay. Okay, and that's attaching to the levator ani, that urogenital hiatus and the levator ani. And then we have the deep perineal pouch, which is this space between the perineal membrane and the pelvic diaphragm. In that deep perineal pouch, we have the urethral opening here, and a whole bunch of stuff that we'll get into. So, to kind of put it in perspective, here are the two structures together. So we've got the pelvic diaphragm sitting on top, and you see here attachment at the urogenital hiatus there. And then here we see the deep perineal pouch. So this kind of puts it all together. So then we get into the deep perineal pouch, and we've got several different structures. So this is first the male version. And we've got the opening for the urethra, and around it, the external urethral sphincter, which is a circular band of skeletal muscle. And functions to close off the urethra, obviously. We have two muscles here along the back, kind of tracing on the anterior side of that, are the deep transverse perineal muscles, which attach to a connective tissue structure here, we'll talk about later. Then we have all of these other muscles, which your book does not name, so I had to go sleuthing about because I was curious. And they're the deep transverse peronei. You don't have to know that, but if anyone else was dying because they didn't know what that was, there you go. Okay, here's the female version. So we've got obviously the opening for the urethra as well as the vaginal aperture. We have a few extra muscles, so we do have, like in the male, the external urethral sphincter and the deep transverse perineal muscles. But in addition to that, we also have this sphincter urethrovaginalis, which travels all the way around as a circular muscle, all the way around both the vaginal aperture and the urethral aperture. Then we also have the compressor urethrae, which travels kind of in a U shape, so starting from the edge, coming out, around, and then back down this other edge here. This is also important for compressing the urethra, not closing it off. Some images have a muscle that's like the compressor urethrae in males as well, but we don't have to know that for this class. Okay, so then I was talking about that connective tissue structure that the transverse deep perineal muscle attaches to. That's the perineal body. So it's this kind of diffuse, kind of poorly defined structure. It's just a little area of connective tissue. So the deep transverse perineal muscle inside here. So this would be the deep transverse perineal muscle inside the perineal pouch, and then we also have the superficial transverse perineal muscle below the perineal membrane that also attaches to the perineal body. Several other structures attached to it too. We're not going to get into them. I think I have a list of them on your notes, and at some point or another in the next couple lectures, I'm sure we'll get to all of them, but right now we know it's just a connective tissue structure. Where muscles attach. Okay?
So you would say that attaches to the deep transverse perineal muscles?
Yes. So in this image here, see this structure right here? That's the perineal body. And so these attach to it as well. And that's what that green blob is supposed to be representing. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so that is the pelvic floor. Now we'll just do a brief tour through the viscera in the pelvis. So, as we all know, the GI tract ends in the pelvis. So I just want to point out a few structures here for you to make sure and know. So the rectal ampulla is just an enlarged area at the end of the rectum. Just before it narrows into the anal canal. And you see how the anal canal begins right at the level of the pelvic diaphragm and at the level of the external anal sphincters. Okay, the external anal sphincters is actually a group of 3 bands of muscles. That we'll get into later. Yes?
You said it begins
At the pelvic diaphragm. Mm-hmm. So,
Thank you.
yep. Okay, good. So here's a side view. So first of all, let's look at the external sphincter muscles. Again, this is a skeletal muscle sphincter. And since it's a skeletal muscle sphincter, is it autonomically or somatically innervated? Somatically. So this is what we have voluntary control of. Same with the external urethral sphincter. It's skeletal. We have voluntary control over opening and closing that sphincter. Okay? So here we have the three different rings, the superficial, the deep, and the subcutaneous. I'll point out a couple of important features of the anal canal. So first of all, the anocutaneous line. This is the place where the epithelial tissue, so inside the anal canal, it's a stratified squamous epithelium, and this is where it starts transitioning into skin tissue. So, epithelium to skin transition, okay? The other one that is important to know is the pectinate line. This is a line right here. Circumnavigates the anal canal, and it's a couple of different things. So first of all, it is, draw this up here, it's the remnant of an embryonic structure. So that's the location of the anal membrane in a fetus. It's fetal. And that is a membrane that kind of closes off the terminal end of the GI tract so that the fetus does not defecate while in the womb, which would be bad. Also is the location of the anal valves. So the anal valves are little crescent-shaped folds of tissue that are between these longitudinal folds called the anal columns. So as the GI tract transitions from the rectum to the anal canal, these anal columns or longitudinal folds appear. And then down at the base of them, we have these little crescent-shaped structures here that are the anal valves. And the anal valves are important for helping with closure of the anal canal. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. And I just want to point out the location of the internal anal sphincter here is a smooth muscle. So this is autonomically innervated here, smooth muscle.
Sorry, do you mind repeating the difference between the columns and the valves?
We'll go over it again on the next slide. Yeah. So I just want to point the internal anal sphincter. Okay, so back to the anal columns and valves. So the anal columns are just longitudinal ridges. So it's basically like the anal canal has got this folded interior surface.
Along the wall, though.
Along the wall. Mm-hmm. Yep, and then at the base of those folds is where we have these little crescent-shaped structures, the anal valves. Okay, and inside the anal valves, we have veins running. Okay, so we're going to focus in on the veins for now. And remember, this is a location of anastomosis. So the superior rectal veins are going to the portal system, and the inferior rectal veins are going to the caval system. Yes?
Okay, on the previous slide, just trying to get a thought in my head.
Yep.
The pectinate line
Mm-hmm.
with that one, so sometimes, like, if the baby does end up defecating into the sac, I know it's very dangerous because of the aspiration and all that.
Mhm.
Is that if that is not completely
Yeah, so
formed?
if that's compromised in any way.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so here we have our anal valves right here. And so we get this anastomosis of the veins there. But what happens is these veins actually engorge with blood here. Okay, so, and they help to help close off that the anal canal. So the blood pools in them and actually decreases the circumference of the anal canal. Now remember when we were talking about the anastomoses, if we get too much engorgement of those veins, what do we get? Hemorrhoids, exactly.
And which ones are those? Are those the portal system or these?
Both.
Both.
Both contribute, because remember they anastomosis here.
Right.
They all get into the same area. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? All right. So then let's move to the urinary system. So just a few notes about the bladder. So as we all know, the bladder is very small when empty. It distends quite a lot. Just how much depends on the person. As it distends, it extends superiorly, so it moves upward into the abdominal cavity. As it moves superiorly, it actually pinches off the ureters. So the ureters, you can see they're kind of coming in underneath the edge of the bladder. So as the bladder fills, it ends up pinching off the ureters, so you don't get retroflux of the urine back up into the kidneys, which would be all sorts of not good. Okay. This right here is the apex of the bladder. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail on this slide. So at the apex of the bladder, we have this extension here, the median umbilical ligament. And where did you see the other end of that ligament in lab quiz? At the umbilicus. So this is a continuous structure up to the umbilicus. It is a leftover structure from development, so it's a rudimentary structure of the urachus. I misspelled that in the notes, so it has an H in there. And this was basically a shunt from the urinary bladder up to the umbilical area during development to help shunt waste off into the maternal circulation before the placenta is developed enough for all of the waste to just be directly processed through the maternal circulation. Excuse me. Okay. We also have a structure called the trigone, and this is a triangle that is generated if you draw straight lines between all of the different openings in the bladder, so between the two ureters and the urethra. It's a very smooth portion of the bladder rather than wrinkled like the rest of the bladder is when it's not distended. Okay, so here again we see the trigone, a smooth structure, and then we see the wrinkled internal structure of a non-distended bladder. Okay, the neck of the bladder, as well as the urethra, is stabilized by a couple of ligaments. So in the female, it's called the pubovesical ligament, and it attaches to the pubic bones on the posterior inferior side. So this would be the pubic tubercle there. Wraps around the urethra, and then comes back and attaches to the pubic bone on the other side. Okay? Absolutely. So the pubovesical ligament attaches to the pubic bone, the back part of the pubic bone, so the posterolateral or inferior portion goes out around the urethra and then attaches on the other side to the pubic bone in the same location as the first side. So kind of just this loop. And this stabilizes the neck of the bladder and the urethra. In the male, so this is female, in the male, It's called the puboprostatic ligament because it wraps all the way around the prostate gland rather than just around the urethra. Here's a couple of potential problems you can get with the urinary system. So we talked about kidney stones. We also can have bladder stones. Often bladder stones are very small kidney stones that move into the bladder and then become larger and can get lodged in the bladder. If it gets lodged near the opening of the ureter, it can cause kind of the same thing as a full-fledged kidney stone, causing backup of the urine in the ureter and also into the calyces of the kidney. So this is where a intravenous urogram is useful, so you can visualize that. And anybody remember the contrast material that's most often used for these? Iodine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can see the dilated ureter, whereas on the other side it's almost invisible, and you only see very, very slight structural definition of the calyces, whereas on the side with the problem you have very huge, big dilation of the calyces there. This is most often a problem in people who have trouble voiding their bladders completely. So there's time for all of the crystals and the salts to solidify into those stones. Okay. Also, another problem that's often seen is bladder cancer. So here you can see a small tumor in this X-ray. These can be either superficial tumors, which just means they're growing on the endothelial layer of the bladder, or they can be deeper and actually invade the bladder wall. Once they invade the bladder wall, they are a lot more difficult to get rid of, require a lot more aggressive treatment. One treatment that was fairly new when my mom was diagnosed with bladder cancer was called the BCG. And this is actually a vaccination against tuberculosis. And what they do is they just wash it inside the bladder, and it hyperactivates the immune system to go in and attack the cancer cells. So it's an immunotherapy. And this is useful against superficial. Wow. Tumors. Bladder cancer can be very aggressive, so as soon as they detect it, they go after it very, very aggressively. They go and surgically remove as many tumors and polyps as they can find. They biopsy the bladder wall to make sure that it hasn't infiltrated the bladder wall. Once it infiltrates the bladder wall, it can be very invasive and move into other structures surrounding. It can also sometimes metastasize. So then they do this BCG therapy over the course of about 5 years to make sure that all of the bladder cancer is gone and doesn't reappear. So, excuse me. All right. Here's another abnormality, anatomical abnormality. So this is a pelvic kidney, and unlike in pelvic or in kidney transplants, they didn't put it there; it just grew there. So in cases like this, you will have only one kidney that has developed in the abdominal cavity, and then if you go searching for it, you can find the other one in the pelvic cavity instead. Sometimes it is asymptomatic, so you can function just fine with it in the pelvic cavity. Okay, and then a couple of notes about the urethra again. So in the female, once again is female, we have the external urethral sphincter around the edge of the urethra as it's going through the deep perineal pouch. And we have the paraurethral gland. This gland sits kind of at the opening of the urethra. It secretes a mucus that combats the acidity of the urine. And also combats invasive microorganisms. So any microorganisms coming in to infect the bladder or the urethra. Okay. On the male, it's a little more complicated story. So there's 4 different parts of the urethra you need to be familiar with. And you need to know the structure surrounding each part. So first we have the pre-prostatic part of the urethra. This is just a very short segment that is between the neck of the bladder and the prostate gland. Okay, and it's surrounded by the internal urethral sphincter. So then we have the second part, the prostatic part of the urethra, and that is surrounded by the prostate gland. Third part is the membranous part. That is the part that moves through the deep perineal pouch and is surrounded by the external urethral sphincter. Okay. Just to note, yep. We have all the time in the world today. The external urethral sphincter.
And you said that it moves through the deep peritoneal pouch?
The deep perineal pouch, yep.
3 it does?
Yes. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Just a note, remember on the female, there is no internal urethral sphincter. It's not there. So that is a male-only structure. And they actually just found that out not too long ago. So it's amazing. We're still learning stuff about anatomy. Okay, and then we get into the actual body of the penis, and we have the spongy part of the urethra, which you guys have been learning, and that is running through the corpus spongiosum. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then finally exits through the external urethral orifice. So in contrast to the 4 centimeter long female urethra, so here this is about 4 centimeters long. The male's is much longer, much more complicated. But you know each part really good. All right, and then we just want to go back and look at the prostatic portion of it. So it's completely surrounded, like I said, with the prostate gland. As we'll learn when we move into the reproductive systems, we have the openings of the ejaculatory ducts coming in on the posterior surface of the prostatic urethra. We also have lots of smaller pores, which are openings of the prostate glandular ducts. And then we also have a prostatic utricle, which is a larger duct as well. Okay. And then you can see here above it the internal urethral sphincter, and below it the external urethral sphincter. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
What should we know about these ducts? Like, should we know?
They open within the prostatic urethra. That's about all. I don't know that they have them named beyond that. The only one I want you to know separately is the openings of the ejaculatory ducts, because it's got a different function. The rest of them, it's just openings of the gland.
But we don't need to know like the specific names of.
The prostatic utricle.
So,
If you go into urology, you'll have to know it. Yeah.
so like we don't have any smooth muscle sphincters?
No, we don't have a smooth muscle sphincter
So
as
that means
females.
we're like consciously or subconsciously controlling it?
Yeah.
All the time?
Yeah, something like that.
Really?
Yeah. So we have no internal urethral sphincter at all, so. Yeah, okay. Any other questions? No? Well, that's all I've got to talk about today, so. Enjoy extra 10 minutes of freedom. Yes,
I
ma'am.
was finishing stuff yesterday.
Okay.
We don't have this label at all. And I think H was labeled down. We labeled it
Oh,
H
okay.
synthesis. So that's what I think it is. And you just take request.
Yeah, about that. That's definitely not the fusion.
I know. I'm like, it's not. So do you
Yeah.
want us to label it as the median sacral crest? Because what is in the Alice? Or
Yeah, go with what's in the atlas.
and then 9. I don't. That structure is not labeled anywhere. Are you talking about the sacrum itself, like the overall thing, or?
This is a representative cavity.
There is a name for it, but I can't remember what it is.
Because it's not on our thing.
It's
9,
not on
10, and
the-
11 are not.
They're not listed?
No, so
Okay.
10 is the sacral hiatus, right?
Right.
And then 11 is the coccyx.
Yeah.
Okay, so what 9 is not? And I couldn't find it anywhere.
Well, if you don't find it anywhere, you don't need to know it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I was reading a little bit of the pelvis because I was like confused about the floor and stuff.
Uh-huh.